Okay, gang, so we've taken a look at type size, we've taken a look at leading. Now it's time to really talk about kerning and tracking. So I'm going to go ahead and just work with one word here. So I'll work with the word pliers, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. So first, let's talk about what kerning is and what tracking is. So both of them, both kerning and tracking, are forms of letter spacing. Specifically, the horizontal space in between each letter. So the space between this P and this L, for example. Okay? So that's what letter spacing is. Now, we have two options here on the character palette. We have kerning and we have tracking. Now, they are similar yet very different. We'll do tracking first. Tracking will give you something, so it'll happen. So we start out at 0, right? And we can track positively or we can track negatively, okay? So if I go ahead and I type in, I put in like 100 here, what we do is we spread our letters out more, so we increase our letter spacing. And if I did a negative 100, then my letters get closer to one another. So it's a negative letter spacing. And essentially what this is tracking is a global change, which means that it affects everything, and it affects the entire line of type. So I can go ahead and I can tap this up a little bit. I can increase this, by 5s and 10s. I can, go ahead and do this however I need to and however I feel like I need it, to be. And the fact is that most of the times at 0, we're just not as successful as we could be, especially when you think about how we read text in general. So I tend to work in tracking first and get a sense of, well, how far or how close do I want these letters to be to one another in general, right? And it's not a rule. There's nothing like that. It all depends on what it is you're doing. So let's say I'm creating a logo or a word mark or something like that, a title, and let's say it's called pliers, right? I might want to go ahead and bring all these letters a little bit closer to one another. So this is where I would first come at tracking. I would attack that. I would maybe go for like a negative 25 and see what that works. And just doing that negative 25 made this thing a little bit easier to read because now there isn't so much white space in between the letter forms. Now, we have some differences, though, across them. So if we take a look at the P and the L, there's a pretty large space between there. Specifically, there's a larger space between the P and L than there is the L and the Y. The E and the Y have a large space in between it, a much larger space than the E and the R, for example. And the R and the S, is a little different. So I can't select, I can't just highlight a couple letters. I shouldn't say I can't. I can highlight a couple letters and I can bring these things closer to one another specifically because tracking is a global change. But what I can't do is I can't just apply tracking to a single letter. I shouldn't say I can't. I can apply tracking to a single letter, but I lose control because it's not really the letter that I need to really play around with. It's the space. Because if I apply tracking to a single letter like this, I just push more space forward. So which means that I would always have to worry about, the space that's happening after the letter form versus the space that's happening both before and after the letter form. So anyway, so tracking is that global change. What we want is a more specific change. And that, my friends, is kerning. So if I go ahead, and this is kerning, it's got the V and the A with a little slash in between them. If I click on here, I don't get many options. I get auto, optical, metrics, and 0. So, optical kind of looked like it did something, but everything else just kind of is what it is. So, auto, optical, and metrics, all that stuff, right? What that is, those are just general kind of, how do I put this? Rules that we can apply via kerning. And yeah, optical works okay, especially for the novice. It actually will go ahead and it will attempt to put everything in a quote unquote perfect order, right? Make everything optically have the same balance in between each letter form. And that's cool, but it doesn't work out perfectly sometimes. In fact, a lot of times you run into problems with it. So instead, what we want to do is we want to be able to apply kerning specifically to a couple letters. So if I grab this and I go back here, all these numbers, the -5 to 100 and the +5s to 200, they're all grayed out. So what I actually have to do is I have to go ahead and take my type tool and I have to roll in here in between the letters that I want. And I'll click right here in between the P and the L, all right? And then I'll come over here with my kerning, and if I, with my kerning, and if I increase it, I add more space there. And if I decrease it, like -25, I decrease the space. So that makes life a whole lot easier, right? So I can go ahead and in certain areas, I want to only decrease a little bit, while in others, I have to increase or decrease more. So in between this Y and this E, I might go -50. But between this R and this S, I might say -10. And there we are, right? So this way we have more control over the type in general, right? Versus just clicking a button and hoping it works out. The other thing that I should point out in general when working with kerning and tracking, so I'm just going to go back to auto and 0 really quick, is this. If I go ahead and I select an object and I hold down the Option, or on a PC the Alt key, and I use the right arrow, what that does is it increases my tracking. And if I use the left arrow, so again this is Option or Alt left or Option or Alt right, then check this out, it goes ahead and it decreases. So really quickly you can go ahead and you can do this, and you can visually line these things up, and it jumps by 20s, so it's not exactly perfect, but it gets you a pretty good sense of where you want to be and have to be. And then if I click in between two letters, like between this P and this L again, and hold down Option and start using the right or left arrows, then I can do the same thing. So right increases kerning, left decreases kerning. So you can actually get in here and you can change this stuff up pretty quickly. I'd also like to point out, even though I forgot to do it in my last video, so I think I had Pliers John written here before, right? So if I select this and I use that same Option or Alt key on a PC and I tap up, I decrease leading, and if I tap down, I increase leading. So this is a quick way for me to go ahead and experiment with leading as well. So those shortcuts again are Option or Alt to the right will increase your tracking, to the left will decrease your tracking. Option Alt pressing down will go ahead and increase your leading, pressing up will decrease your leading. And if you are in between two letter forms, Option right increases kerning, Option left or Alt left decreases kerning. And we have Pliers John. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a new rock band. That's a joke. So anyway, this is where we're at right now. So kerning, tracking, both extremely essential. And I'd like to point out now that I'm an illustrator, and let's say this is where I'm at, right? I have no idea what Pliers John really is, but let's just say it's something that I'm working on. So you see how I start to form relationships? So I have this L here and this J is below it. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to turn on my ruler. So I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to go to, not Window, View, and I'm going to go to Rulers, which is on right here, and Show My Rulers, which is Command R. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a guide. So I'm just going to roll my mouse over here to the edge, and I'm going to pull a line right over here and line up on the L. Do that one more time, so I actually line right up on the L like I want. Perfect, just like that. And I'm going to zoom in here. And check this out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click right before the J. Not after, but before. And I'm going to option, and I'm going to just move to the right. And I'll zoom in a little bit more. It's important that I have this, right. So when I went ahead and I clicked option right here, I went ahead and I changed my tracking, or excuse me, my kerning. So now I want to bring it back a little bit, just like that. And now this and this are lined up. Now, do you notice though how the capital J and the L in pliers aren't exactly as wide as one another? So really, I should play around with that a little bit too, and maybe split the difference. But now I'll zoom out of here and I'll turn that off and click off of this, and there you go. And that might be a pretty good relationship. I somehow inadvertently went ahead and increased. I think I just put a space there. I did. That's what I did. Let's bring that back. So there. That's what I was looking to do. And now take a look how this L and this J kind of line up with one another, and it makes it work out a little bit better. If I wanted to as well, I could take John in general, and I could open those up a little bit, and then move this over just like that. And now I'm starting to utilize pretty much the same space I have the L lined up with the J, and then pliers is going from the L to the S. I have the J to the N here, taking up pretty similar space. So we can go ahead and we can do these sorts of things, and it's very helpful and useful. And these are the kinds of things that you want to start to recognize and want to start to realize that these things can happen and do happen in many times. If you remember correctly, in the Helvetica movie, there was a Tribeca Film Festival poster where they used the I in Tribeca, and they went ahead and they just extended it down, and it became the I in film, and then it also became the I in festival. So it read Tribeca Film Festival. And if you can do things like that, you can make a whole lot of cool things happen. So that is, let's see, type size, leading, kerning, and tracking, okay? 4 essential things to go ahead and create really good looking type. Now, I mentioned that we're working in Illustrator right now. And what Illustrator does is it goes ahead and it turns everything into an object, right? Which means if I go ahead and I grab this Pliers John text that I have, and I realize it's the most absurd kind of text that there could be. I have no idea what Pliers John is, not pretending I do. But anyway, before I do that, that's bothering me. That O right there is bothering me big time. Yeah. And this is how you know that you're a good typographer. Little things like letters not touching one another or touching one another, they bother you. So you have to go and kind of tweak them and fix them. But anyway, now that I'm kind of happy with what I've got going on here, I'm going to select this. And Illustrator creates a bounding box. And now if I were to go ahead and create, let's say, a circle in Illustrator, it also creates a bounding box, which allows me to click on this and move it. And I can also click on this thing and I can get an arrow. And if I click, I can drag. And I can go ahead and take this circle and drag it and make it bigger or smaller. And I can even mess with it and make it kind of go out of whack because I don't hold down my shift key. If I hold down my shift key, check it out. A perfect circle, either smaller or bigger. Now, I bring that up because I want to show you something. Let's say you create this, and this is, I don't know, a logo you've been working on or something like that, right? A word mark you've been experimenting with for a title for a magazine, or I don't know, whatever it is, right? So you got to make it smaller or you got to make it bigger. It looks good, it just isn't the right size. So this is what it looks like. So if I select this thing and I need to make it smaller, let's say I need to make it approximately, I don't know, 20 points in size. So I can go ahead and I can just highlight this and I can say 20 points and go. And look what happened there. That's not exactly what I was expecting, right? I was expecting it to go ahead and, kind of like keep everything that was there. And here's the thing. Kerning and tracking stay, but letting doesn't. Letting didn't stay because letting was a hard number. But weren't kerning and tracking hard numbers too? Weren't they like, -60 or +40 or something like that? The answer is yes, they absolutely were. But for one reason or another, if you go ahead and you change your font size after you've gone ahead and you've tweaked it and you've made it look the way you want in Illustrator, this doesn't work. In fact, and it also doesn't work in the other Adobe softwares either. It's probably one of the worst things that happens when you're working as a type designer. So this is where having an object, really comes into place really nice. So if I need to make this thing smaller, I can select it, I can hold down the shift key, and I can go ahead and I can scale it down. And you'll see that my letting and my kerning and my tracking all stay respectively where they were, right? So when I went ahead and I did this the first time, my font size was 58, but my letting my font size was 75, but my letting was 58. So that's 17 points below where, it was. So approximately 25% less, right? And now here, my font size is 21.55. My letting is 16.66. Again, it's still approximately 25% less. So when you go ahead and you scale it as an object, it can hold on to that relationship between type size and letting and kerning and tracking. But when you don't, when you just go ahead and change the size, it can't do it. Again, kerning and tracking stay, but letting does not, which is kind of sad and unfortunate. And I really wish that they just had like a little link here that I could just click, and then that would go ahead and make them come together. Maybe that's what they'll do in the next version of Illustrator and the next version of different Adobe softwares. If I had my way, they 100% would. I gotta believe that there's other people like me out there who want that as an option, but they still haven't done it yet. So all I can say is keep writing your letters to them, and hopefully they will. But that is just something I needed to point out, so so when you're going ahead and building these things, you know when to size them with the palette, and you know when to go ahead and size them as an object. Lastly, you can size them, since they are objects, you can go to Object Transform, and you can do scaling here. And so we could grow this 150% and say okay, and there we go. So that will work in general. So go ahead, experiment. Know this, to respect type, not only do you have to pick the right kind of type and understand why you're picking that type, but you need to understand the relationship between type size, letting, tracking, and kerning. And if you can do that, then you'll be a good type designer. And the best part is that I don't even think about it anymore. I just do it. And sooner or later, that's where you get. You don't have to think. You just go ahead and make it get done. And it works. It's easy, and it doesn't really screw up your designs or anything like that, or take away from other things. If anything, it makes everything better. So go ahead, take the extra couple minutes, respect the type, and make sure that you're doing this and practice this. And I'm going to give you an assignment in the future where you're going to have to do this, but by all means, go ahead and just experiment and practice. Thank you.